If someone from the general public saw a tricker, they would very often assume what they're doing is called parkour. This age-old problem has upset not only people who do parkour, but also the trickers who have longed for tricking to be acknowledged as its own sport. As a result, there have been times where trickers and free runners haven't really gotten along. Gymnastic sprung floors are where trickers and free runners often come face to face. These have become tense, cold, war-like zones as each side battles for control of the sprung floor. The trickers believe the floor is theirs by birthright, so they use the full radius of these floors just to practice a round-off backflip. Free runners, on the other hand, believe the sprung floor belongs to them, so they obnoxiously slap big foam blocks in the middle of it to launch themselves through the air and practice dive kongs. But as time passed, so did this tension. Trickers and free runners realized they weren't that dissimilar, and now, in 2021, the relationship between tricking and parkour is closer than ever. So close, in fact, that some might wonder, is tricking taking over parkour? In today's video, we will explore exactly that. To start off, tricking and parkour are fundamentally different sports. Unlike parkour and free running, which people have pedantically argued over for the last few decades, tricking is very much its own separate discipline with its own unique heritage and culture. Originally dubbed sports martial arts, tricking evolved from combining the more aesthetic side of martial arts into sequences of tricks. There are no obstacles or anything other than the floor and a human body. Objectively, what a tricker is trying to do is seamlessly flow tricks one into another. But as a result of using flips, tricking has often been lumped in with parkour and free running by the general public, which has annoyed both free runners and trickers. Despite these two sports being trained quite differently, there is a lot of overlap. For starters, when it comes to the tricks that trickers do, most of those tricks free runners will also do. Certain connective moves that trickers do between tricks might not be seen in free running, but most of the movements are seen in both. Also, much like free running, tricking doesn't really have any rules. There's nothing telling you what you can or can't do. If you can think it up in your head, you can do it. This is distinctly different from gymnastic floor routines, despite being done in the same location. Difficult routines starting at a 6.9 in difficulty, gymnastics has an extremely strict rule set for what flips are allowed and what aren't. For instance, corks, side flips, and most of the flips you see here would score 0 points in gymnastics. They're quite literally illegal. On top of this, there's even more overlap because trickers train in gymnastic centers, which is where you will also find free runners who are trying to learn flips before they take them outside onto concrete. Lastly, trickers and free runners do at times train together. In fact, many free runners might even admit to being a tricker. It's a weird one because sure, there were tensions between the more pure parkour end of the sport, who saw flips as pointless, and the annoyed trickers who were fed up with having their sport mislabeled. However, there were some free runners, also known as traitors, who in the dark of night would sneak across enemy lines and join the trickers in their pagan rituals of doing flips on flat ground. These rebels, little did they know, would go on to pioneer a whole new style of parkour throughout the 2010s, which now, in 2021, has effectively created its own distinct subgenre of free running. But before we talk about that, let's look at how tricking's integration into parkour slowly evolved. Back in the 2000s, while parkour was having its meteoric rise in the media, the sport of tricking was quietly doing the same thing. Tricking is said to have really developed into its own thing around the 90s. Coincidentally, this was the exact same time as parkour and free running. However, tricking got somewhat overshadowed by parkour and free running in the media. Parkour, often described as the most acrobatic way to get from A to B, overshadowed tricking because parkour started to feature in major films. It's generally considered cooler than tricking. If James Bond and Sebastian Foucan didn't have a chase scene but instead had a tricking battle, it wouldn't have been the same film. Before mainstream attention, throughout the 90s, parkour and tricking largely stayed completely separate, but that would all change in an instant. One day, free runners realized they didn't have to keep slamming their bodies against concrete to learn how to do a front flip. Instead, they could go to what was effectively an adult soft play area and launch their bodies through space with zero consequences. Throughout the early 2000s, free runners flocked to gymnastic halls all over the world to learn moves that were far too risky to attempt outside. As these gleeful free runners lined up to attend their first gym session, the doors flung open and they came face to face with the elusive trickers. An army of free runners charged through the doors, grabbing crash mats, foam blocks, and frothing at the mouth at the thought of all the double kongs they could now send. As Armageddon broke out, trickers watched in despair as their sacred sprung floor was littered with foam blocks and sweaty freerunner kits. This created a passive-aggressive feud that lasted for years. During this time, doing parkour at the gym became very popular. The Water and Chief series epitomized gym parkour, with these two doing crazy stunts only possible in a gym, and their videos went viral in the early days of social media. However, as silly as it looked, the moment free runners walked into a gymnastics center marked a pivotal change within parkour itself. These free runner kids started to get good at doing flips, not just sending a janky backflip at the end of a line. Free runners began to do hard tricks and integrate them into parkour lines, perfecting their understanding of flips and aerial awareness. This gave them the confidence to get more creative with their flips. I made a whole video on how free runners developed the backflip, where I talked about the congainer and why it was a pivotal moment for the sport. I also made a video about how free runners learned to flip to handrails. Most of the crazy moves you see today likely wouldn't have happened if free runners hadn't stepped foot inside a gym. So what came of the feud between trickers and free runners? If you put two enemies in one room, either they'll go to war and one will reign victorious, or they'll learn to get along. Over time, more free runners started doing tricking, and some trickers took up parkour. Trickers lent their understanding of momentum and aerial awareness, while parkour athletes shared their knowledge of vaults, climbs, and jumps. Athletes like Ryan Doyle, Tim Sheaf, and Daniel Ilabaka became popular for their free running style rooted in tricking, martial arts, and breakdance. They created something unique, learning to combo flips together during runs. In the early days of this style, flips were often isolated, but now they are more integrated into lines. Teams like Free Run Tube capitalized on this flip-heavy style, creating two factions within the sport: those who trained like Free Run Tube and the pure parkour people, who often didn't mix. One important outlier bridged the gap between parkour and free running: Daniel Ilabaka. Danny showed that you could integrate flips into extremely hard parkour lines, blending elegance and power. His influence revolutionized parkour. This leads us to 2021, where a new hybrid style of tricking and parkour has emerged. Unlike Daniel Ilabaka's style, which was parkour lines with tricking mixed in, this new style is effectively tricking lines with parkour mixed in. It features continuous flows of flips across obstacles, with no dead space. Athletes like Archie Arroyan and Nico Flo exemplify this style, seamlessly linking flips across obstacles. Nico Flo, for instance, has developed a unique style with no prior parkour experience, drawing from his background in tricking. Another style, inspired by Lotus Ninja, includes off-axis flips and grabs, seen in athletes like Josh Malone and his team, Beans Out the Can. This style is new and distinctive. All of this leads to the question, is this good for parkour? This hybrid style is gaining attention and growing, potentially overshadowing pure parkour. However, it can inspire new participants and offer fresh ideas to experienced athletes. Learning tricking can enhance an athlete's aerial awareness and bodily control, vital for advanced parkour movements. In conclusion, while some may prefer traditional parkour, the evolution of the sport through influences like tricking is natural and beneficial. This hybrid style can attract new fans and inspire creativity, ensuring the sport's growth and accessibility. As with any evolving art form, embracing change can lead to a richer and more diverse community. Let me know what you think of tricking's influence in the world of parkour. Like this video and subscribe to the channel.